Hey everybody, Matt Barton here with this week's Broker Minute or Two. Hey, so I have been getting a fair amount of questions over the past 2, 3 months about more than I've seen in quite a while about short sales, about foreclosures. And so I figured I'd use this week's Broker Minute or Two to talk about those. So, first off, let's kind of size the market and where we really are because people hear sensational things. So, for instance, if you were to ask, like, I don't know, Chat GPT, are short sales increasing? You might get the response that the uh, number of short sales have increased 140%. Well, if there was only 10 short sales, that means they just went up, to 24. So it's not a huge jump. So be careful when you hear things like that. The reality is this: some markets in the United States, I think Arizona is an area that has seen an uptick, partially because they've got millions of people, like 6, 7 million people in Maricopa County, or in Sacramento, Northern California. Those areas have experienced an uptick in uh, short sales, and short sales usually are a leading indicator for eventually what happens with foreclosures. So, but in reality, when you look into those markets, which are the ones that are most notable right now, they've seen about a half the number of short sales as compared to the number of sales in their area represents about half of 1%. So to put some flesh on that, in 2024, state of Utah sold 36,000 and some change homes in the state of Utah. So if you took half a percent, that's about 1,882 short sales. If we had experienced the same amount that Arizona and Sacramento, which we're not, but just as an example, then if you divide that by 12 months, you're talking there's 156 short sales in the entire state of Utah in a given month. That's again if we had experienced a half a percent uh, of our total sales increase. So there still are not a lot. And part of the reason you need to understand is if you look at the percentage of homes across the entire United States, and Utah is no exception, the number of people that have substantial equity in their properties is north of 60, 70%. So most people have room to navigate. Not everybody. We do have some, but it's why the numbers haven't upticked in a dramatic fashion. So the rest of this broker minute or two, I just want to compare and contrast short sales, the motivation for banks, lenders, versus foreclosures. So years ago, I spent 3+ years doing foreclosures. That's all I did. And you start to learn the game, the rules of the game in foreclosures. And I'm going to paint with very broad brush here, and we're going to back into short sales. That what I talk about in foreclosure will make you understand why banks typically will engage on a short sale. So let's assume somebody, has a life event or whatever, loses their job, a death of a spouse or something, and they start to fall behind on their mortgage payment. Of course, the first step is, being put on the notice of default. There's typically a 90-day window after that, and if you don't bring the loan current and pay the fees and get back on track, then the bank will has the option to start foreclosure proceedings. Now, what that entails is typically hiring a local law firm, and historically, there's been predominantly 3 different law firms here in the state of Utah. There may be more now, but who handle so many of the foreclosures. Um, and it usually costs the bank anywhere from $8,000 to $12,000. It may have changed a little bit, but that was how much it was, when I was doing foreclosures, to just pay the attorney to get it through the process, right? And this is a private foreclosure. Most of your mortgages have provisions for private foreclosure versus, government foreclosure, which is way more protracted and a lot more rules. So, when a bank is looking at either letting a property go into foreclosure or navigating and saying, yeah, let's do a short sale, well, the cost doesn't stop with paying the bank, sorry, the attorney's firm to get it through foreclosure, right? Usually during this time, they're not earning any interest on the property, right? Because the person has stopped making payments. And when this becomes a little more mainstream, then people figure out a little bit of a game, which is they can go through most of the foreclosure proceeding, and then at the 11th hour they file bankruptcy with a bankruptcy court. And depending on how busy the bankruptcy court is and getting through that process, that puts the brakes on everything. So now, rather than just 3 to 6 months of the bank not earning interest on their money, it could go another 6 months, so they're out a year's worth of interest. So whatever that calculation is, think of your own mortgage and what percentage of that is interest. So that gets added on to the $10,000, $12,000 they're paying the law firm. Then when they actually perfect the foreclosure and the bank now becomes the owner, then they get to go and pay cash for keys, right? This is a process that they go through because it serves their interests. I used to get to deliver these. You'd show up, hey, Mr. Jones, I'm sorry, I'm a messenger. I don't work for the bank, but I have been asked to reach out to you. As you may know, on such and such a date, they took the property back. They are now the owners. You're clearly are here, and they can go through legal proceedings to get you out of the property, but they'd like to keep it, polite and helpful. And if you're willing to be out within 10, 14 days and remove all of your personal property and leave it broom clean, they're willing to give you cash for keys. And it just depends on the bank. It could be $2,000, $5,000, $6,000. And you'll get an earful. Oh, this is so hard. And yeah, I get it, but wouldn't it be better to have $6,000 in your pocket versus zero and having your stuff put on the curb or in a storage unit? So you add that $6,000 onto the $10,000 plus the interest that you haven't earned for a year, and then they have to hire typically a real estate company to market the property and pay the listing brokerage fee and potentially a buyer brokerage fee. So when you add all that money up, depending on the purchase price of the home, they could be getting somewhere in the neighborhood of $80,000, $100,000 into this. And that's if, when the tenant does leave, that they don't beat the crap out of the property. I can just tell you some horror stories on that, where literally air conditioning units were literally ripped off the property with a truck, people taking a hammer in between each of the studs and smashing the sheetrock, and all that repair has to be done by the bank. So it's a very expensive proposition, and that sets up the scenario. And you can't exploit it because there is a threshold. But if you understand what the banks are potentially looking at on a foreclosure, and you come in with a reasonable short sale, hey, listen, we can get this home sold, including some commissions for the agents because we will be working in the process, but it's only going to cost you, you're going to be short $40,000, $30,000. You're probably going to get a bank to play ball. But if you come in with crazy numbers and be like, oh, yeah, we want $200,000 off this $900,000 home, they may just decide to make an insurance claim. That's what some of your private mortgage insurance is there to cover. And even though it's going to be a pain for them and they're going to have to, shell out some money and go through the claims process, there's at just some point where it becomes so painful that they're like, yeah, screw it. We're not doing a short sale. We'll just take it back in foreclosure. So I hope that very high level view of short sale versus foreclosure gives you some understanding of what's going through the institution, the mind of the institution of the bank when they're balancing a foreclosure versus a short sale. Be reasonable. Like my accountant has said to me year after year after year, pigs are cute, hogs get slaughtered. So don't make your offer a hog, make it a pig. And hope that gives you some framework to work with if you run across a short sale or a foreclosure. Hope you have a good week, and hopefully we don't see too many of those in the near future, that we can actually have a healthier market and move forward. That's what I'm looking forward to. I hope you are as well. Talk soon.